The Galactic Council was a place where hundreds of different species gathered to discuss problems that affected everyone in the galaxy. It was a huge hall built on a floating station, surrounded by calm blue lights and soft humming sounds from the machines that kept the entire place alive. Normally, the meetings were serious. Delegates sat in their seats, listening carefully, making notes, and raising concerns whenever needed. But on that day, something unusual happened. The Council had recently passed a temporary rule, a ban on human presence inside the Central Territories. It was meant to be a safety measure, or at least that's what the officials had claimed. But many members of the Council didn't take it seriously. Some didn't even believe there was a real reason behind it. Instead, they thought it was just another overreaction, another dramatic move that humans were known for. So, when the new session started, many species arrived with light moods. Some even came prepared to joke about the ban. A tall delegate with a smooth silver skin raised his voice first. "A ban on humans?" he said with a laugh. What danger could they possibly bring? They barely handle their own planet. A group of nearby delegates chuckled. They found the idea funny that a species like humans, who are often emotional, curious, and sometimes unpredictable, had been banned as if they were a major threat. Another delegate, one with crystal-like eyes, joined in. Next thing you know, they'll say humans discovered something that could end the galaxy. That species loves dramatic stories. More laughter spread across the seats. The idea of taking humans seriously seemed amusing to them. In their minds, humans caused small problems, nothing worth banning them over. And even if something had happened, the delegates assumed it was exaggerated. All this laughter filled the room, rising like an echo that bounced between the walls. Some delegates even imitated humans, exaggerating their gestures or their emotional expressions. A few shook their heads, unable to understand why the Council had agreed to such a decision. But in one corner of the hall, a few silent observers watched everything without speaking. They didn't join the laughter. They didn't speak up. They simply observed, their faces calm but serious. These were individuals who had seen something not yet shared with the entire Council. They exchanged small glances, the kind of look people give when they know something important, but can't say it yet. Meanwhile, the Council's presiding officer tried to maintain order. He tapped the central podium lights, signaling for quiet, but the giggles continued. Delegates were too entertained by their own jokes. "Please return to the agenda," the officer called out. But instead of settling down, more jokes followed. One delegate leaned back in his seat and said loudly, "Maybe humans banned themselves so they don't embarrass anyone." Another voice responded, "I heard they found a scary shadow in one of their stations and ran away." The entire section erupted into more laughter. To them, this was all harmless fun. They believed humans were simply being overly dramatic again, reacting to something small and making it sound big. But what surprised the observers sitting quietly in the corner was how confidently these delegates mocked the situation without knowing anything. Not even a small piece of the real story had been shared with them. If only they knew. If only they had seen what a handful of humans had seen on a remote station far from the Central Territories. But no one in this hall knew that yet, not even the ones making the loudest jokes. While the laughter continued, a low hum drifted through the hall as a display panel activated. It showed a simple message: human diplomatic presence suspended. The words looked harmless, but they carried weight. Earth had cut all communication. No messages, no envoys, no participation, nothing. Still, the delegates didn't take it seriously. One delegate pointed at the message and said, "Look." They even made it official. Maybe they are upset that no one noticed their last speech. Another replied, "Let them be upset." They'll return when they calm down. Humans always do. But the observers watching silently knew that wasn't true. Humans had not withdrawn because they were upset. They had withdrawn because something had happened, something they believed the galaxy wasn't ready for. The council officer finally managed to bring the room to silence. "Let us continue with the agenda," he said. "We must discuss the reports from the outer research stations." But before he could move to the next topic, another delegate raised a hand. "Before that," he said with a playful tone, "I would like to suggest a new rule. If a human tries to enter the Central Territories, we should ask them to explain the reason for their dramatic exit. It could be entertaining." More laughter followed. The atmosphere felt more like a comedy gathering than a council meeting. At that moment, one of the quiet observers shifted slightly in his seat. His expression grew tense. He had seen what the humans had seen, and he knew that making fun of them was not only wrong, it was dangerous. But he also knew that if he spoke now, no one would believe him. Not without proof. Not without the footage the humans had locked away. So he stayed silent. The council resumed its agenda, but the mood remained light. Delegates whispered small jokes, exchanged amused glances, and still seemed unconvinced that the ban was necessary. In their minds, humans were simply being dramatic again. The officer continued speaking, but many delegates weren't paying attention. Their thoughts kept returning to the ban, treating it as a small inconvenience, something temporary and meaningless. No. One imagined that the decision had been made because of a real concern. No one suspected that Earth had detected something unusual on a distant station. No one in that hall imagined that a camera had recorded something that didn't fit into any known category, something that even advanced species could not explain. The only ones who knew anything at all were the human envoys, and they had already left the council the day the ban was announced. As the meeting continued, a soft alert flashed on another screen. It simply stated, "Earth Envoy Presence Empty." It was the first time in years that the seat assigned to humans remained empty for so long. Some delegates smirked. "Maybe they're hiding," one whispered. "Maybe they're scared." Others nodded with amusement, but there was nothing amusing about the truth. The council hall lights dimmed slightly as the meeting progressed. Outside the giant windows, stars slowly drifted, peaceful and quiet. The galaxy looked calm, stable, predictable. Inside the hall, the delegates continued to discuss minor issues, while still exchanging jokes from time to time. But the observers noticed something odd. Behind the amusement, behind the teasing, there was a hint of ignorance, an unawareness of how fragile their sense of safety really was. One of the observers whispered to another, "They think it's nothing." The other replied softly, "They won't think that for long, because soon, very soon, the footage the humans had taken from that remote station would be played in front of all of them. And when that happened, the faces that were laughing today would not laugh again. For now, though, the hall was filled with light voices and casual chatter, and no one could imagine that the galaxy's peace had already been disturbed without their knowledge. The ban on humans, which everyone found amusing, was not the real story. The real story was hidden, waiting quietly, and when it came out, it would silence the entire room. After the council meeting ended, the delegates slowly left the hall, still amused by the jokes they had shared. Some walked in small groups, whispering and laughing about how humans had suddenly stopped all communication. To them, Earth's silence was just another sign that humans were being overly sensitive again. But outside the main chamber, the atmosphere shifted. The glowing corridors were quieter, and the screens lining the walls kept showing one message that many were ignoring: Earth communications offline. Most delegates didn't pay attention. They assumed it was temporary, like a small protest. But deep inside the council headquarters, a handful of officials were growing uneasy. They had been trying to reach Earth for days, and every transmission ended the same way, unanswered. Still, nobody suspected that something serious had happened. Meanwhile, back on Earth, things were very different from what the galaxy imagined. Human representatives who had visited the council were unusually quiet after returning home. They stayed away from interviews, avoided reporters, and refused to answer questions from curious governments. To the outside world, it looked like they were hiding something. People tried to guess the reason. Some thought the council had insulted Earth. Others believed it was just another political disagreement. But the truth was much heavier. Something had happened on a remote research station far away from the Central Territories, an event so strange that even the human team refused to give details. They only said one thing: "We are suspending all diplomacy for now." That single sentence shook Earth's leadership. It wasn't a small thing to cut communication with the Council. Humans depended on those alliances, partnerships, and connections. But the envoys insisted it was necessary for the moment. They didn't say why. Not yet. Across the galaxy, different species noticed Earth's silence. News networks began to discuss it, wondering what could have caused such sudden withdrawal. Some experts claimed it was political. Others insisted humans were only trying to get attention. The Council, however, grew worried. They sent message after message. "Earth, please confirm your status. We request a meeting regarding your withdrawal. Please respond." This silence is unusual. But every message returned with the same automated reply: "No diplomatic channel available." Even then, most council members didn't take it seriously. Many continued to joke about Earth's reaction, saying humans must be upset or acting proud. But there were a few who remembered the expressions on the faces of the human envoys before they left. Those faces weren't angry or offended, they were shaken. The council didn't see that moment. But the quiet observers did. They remembered how the humans had walked out with stiff steps, their eyes focused, their expressions heavy. It wasn't the face of a species throwing a tantrum. It was the face of a species that had seen something it couldn't explain. While the galaxy joked, Earth worked silently. The human envoys gathered with their scientists and military advisors. They played a piece of footage over and over, again trying to understand what they had captured on the remote station. Every time the video ended, the room stayed silent. One of the advisors whispered, "Should we tell the council?" The envoys shook their heads. "Not yet. They'll panic, and they won't believe us." So Earth decided to keep quiet. That decision made the galaxy even more confused. Weeks passed. Council meetings took place as usual, but the seat assigned to humans remained empty every day. It stood there like a reminder of something unresolved. Delegates avoided looking at it too long. It felt strange to see an empty seat in a hall where humans had always been present. Some of the more serious council members finally started to question what was happening. One of them said quietly during a side meeting, "This is not normal. Humans do not isolate themselves without reason." Another replied, "But what could possibly scare them this much?" The truth was, no one had an answer. Later that day, a small team from the council attempted to contact Earth again, this time through an emergency channel. The screen flickered, but again, no response. The signal was strong, the connection was stable, but Earth didn't answer. Some members joked again, but this time, not everyone laughed. Something about Earth's silence felt different. Now, not emotional, not dramatic. It felt deliberate. Back in the council hall, the quiet observers finally began to share their concerns. They spoke privately to a few delegates they trusted. One observer said, "The human envoys saw something. I could sense it in their expressions. They were disturbed." A delegate scoffed. Humans get disturbed over many things. The observer replied softly, "Not like this." He paused, thinking back to the moment when the humans had returned from the outer research station. Their faces had been pale, their voices low. They didn't argue with anyone. They didn't defend their actions. They simply requested the temporary ban and left before anyone could stop them. Another observer added. They didn't even explain themselves. Humans always explain things, even when they're wrong. But this time, they said nothing. That silence alone said a lot. Still, the galaxy didn't know the truth. Meanwhile, news sources tried to gather information. Reporters contacted human government offices, researchers, diplomats, anyone who might offer a clue. But every door they knocked on stayed closed. People on Earth also noticed the unusual behavior. They wondered what their government was hiding, but no official statement was released. All anyone knew was that the envoys had come back early from a mission, and ever since then, something about them felt different. Some human workers from the research station were quietly transferred to secure facilities. Some scientists were placed under strict confidentiality agreements. A few families noticed their loved ones had stopped talking about their work completely, but no one heard the full story. Not yet. Inside the council headquarters, the presiding officer had grown frustrated. The ongoing silence was affecting meetings, planning, and trust. He called a private gathering of senior members and said, "We need answers. Humans have withdrawn completely. This has never happened before." One of the senior members replied, "We should send a team to Earth." Another quickly disagreed. "That may make the situation worse." A third spoke more thoughtfully. "Maybe something serious happened, and they don't want to involve us." The presiding officer rubbed his forehead. "If something happened, they must inform us. We are allies. We share intelligence." But they didn't know that humans were not ready to share, not because they didn't trust the council, but because they didn't know how to explain what they had seen. Earth believed the galaxy wasn't prepared. Night after night, the human envoys and their scientists watched the same footage, trying to study every frame. Some slowed it down to the smallest fraction of a second. Others enhanced the sound, even though there wasn't much of it. They tried to identify the shapes, the movements, the patterns, anything that could make sense. But nothing made sense. It wasn't a creature. It wasn't a machine. It wasn't a natural phenomenon. And it wasn't something from any known species. One envoy whispered while watching the footage, "How do we explain this to the council?" No one answered. They all knew that if the footage was revealed too early, it could cause fear across all major species. Or worse, disbelief. If the council didn't take it seriously, no one else would. So Earth made a decision. Stay silent, investigate privately, and avoid the risk of spreading panic. But silence often creates confusion, and confusion often leads to misunderstanding. Back at the council hall, the jokes slowly began to fade. Not because people were becoming more respectful, but because things no longer felt funny. Every day that Earth stayed quiet made the atmosphere more tense. Some members got nervous. Others grew irritated. A few still didn't care. But the observers noticed something else. The galaxy was slowly waking up to the idea that something wasn't right. One of the observers finally said, "Earth will have to tell us eventually. Silence cannot last forever." And he was right. Because soon, the council would demand answers. And the humans, tired, stressed, and no longer able to hide the truth, would finally show them the footage. The same footage that changed everything. Far away from the busy galactic council halls, beyond the main travel routes, and outside the usual trade paths, there was a quiet research station floating alone in open space. It wasn't impressive or famous. It wasn't the kind of place anyone talked about. Most people didn't even know its exact location. It was just another one of those small, Joint stations where a mix of species worked together to study strange signals and unusual space activity. For many years, nothing special had happened there. The staff monitored readings, tested equipment, wrote reports, and sent them back to their home planets. It was peaceful work, slow, routine, almost boring. The station crew would often joke that the most exciting part of their day was when the lights flickered during a system update. But then something changed. 1 month before Earth cut communication with the Council, the station received a strange signal. At first, it looked like random noise. Space was full of such sounds, static, pulses, and faint waves that had no meaning. But this one was different. It repeated, not in a smooth pattern, but in sharp, uneven bursts, as if something was trying to send a message without knowing how. A technician on the station became curious and monitored the signal for hours. He didn't find anything dangerous in it, so he sent a normal report. Nothing seemed urgent. Nothing seemed wrong, but the pulse kept coming back. A few days later, the station's sensors picked up the signal, again, this time stronger. It wasn't a message from any known species. It didn't match natural space activity, It felt almost deliberate, but no one could understand it. Some of the crew thought it might be from a distant star, maybe a magnetic wave bouncing strangely. Others believed it was an echo from some old satellite drifting in the dark dot, so they kept studying it, thinking it was just another mystery that would one day find a simple explanation. But then the power flickered, and this time the lights didn't come back immediately. The station went almost completely dark for 7 long seconds. For a place that relied on constant electricity to survive, 7 seconds felt like a lifetime. Alarms didn't even activate. They had no power to do so. The crew held their breath, waiting, confused, frightened in a quiet way. When the lights finally returned, everyone looked at each other, surprised and unsure of what had just happened. They checked the systems. Everything looked normal, They searched for damage. Nothing was wrong, It was like the station had simply paused. Later that same night, another strange event happened. One of the corridor's cameras froze for exactly 1 minute. When the video started working again, the corridor looked exactly the same. No movement, no sign of trouble, no object out of place. Still, it felt strange. The crew sent another report, but again, nothing in it sounded dangerous, because none of them had noticed the small detail yet. Hidden deep inside the system logs, written in symbols most people didn't understand, was an unusual reading. Something unknown had interfered with the station's power. But the crew didn't see it. They moved on with their routines, still believing it was just a technical glitch. 2 days later, everything changed. The station's main lab went silent. At first, the crew thought the researchers inside were simply busy. But when the door didn't open, and no one responded to calls, they realized something was wrong. A small group formed outside the lab entrance. They tried every command they knew, but the door refused to unlock. Systems showed the room as active, but no one inside replied. Finally, they opened the emergency panel and used a manual override. The door slid open slowly, with a soft hiss. Inside, the lab was empty. Everything was in place, computers on, lights steady, equipment untouched. But every single researcher who had been working there had vanished. No signs of a struggle, no sign of escape, no warning, no explanation. Only silence. In the middle of the room, one screen was still playing a recording. A small camera, meant to document experiments, was left running. Someone had activated it earlier that day. But when the crew played the footage, the video stopped almost instantly, after starting cut off by static. The team checked the rest of the station, calling for the missing staff, searching every room, every corner. But no one found anything, not even a clue. For the first time, fear traveled quietly through the station's corridors. The next morning, Earth sent a small team to investigate. A group of human envoys arrived wearing simple gear, not soldiers, just specialists. They didn't expect danger, only confusion. Their job was usually to help solve problems, not face threats. They greeted the station crew calmly and listened to every detail. Then they asked for access to the logs, recordings, and power readings from the days leading up to the incident. The station crew felt relieved. Humans were known for their careful approach and analytical thinking. They always tried to find practical explanations. The crew hoped the envoys would figure it out quickly and help restore normal life. At first, the humans believed that too. They reviewed the video from the lab. Static. They checked the corridor. Footage. Normal. They studied the signal that had been repeating randomly. Still unreadable. But when they opened the system logs, they all suddenly stopped. There, in the middle of the data, was a sequence of patterns that didn't match anything known to science. It wasn't a signal coming from outside. It looked like something had reached into the station system from within. The humans exchanged quiet looks. They didn't panic. They didn't shout. But their expressions changed, subtle, tense, uneasy. After several hours of review, one of the envoys requested access to the last experiment the missing researchers had done. It was a simple test involving a device that recorded energy signatures in nearby space. They played the last recording. At first, it showed nothing, just a quiet room, the normal hum of machines, and the researchers working peacefully. Then, for a fraction of a second, a faint distortion appeared in the background of the video. The image bent slightly, like heat shifting the air. Then it snapped back to normal. It was barely noticeable, but the envoys rewound the video and played it again, and again, and again. Each time, their faces grew more serious. One said softly, "That's not a camera glitch." Another whispered, "Something is moving in that frame." They watched the recording dozens of times, slowing it down, zooming in, adjusting the brightness. The distortion became more visible with each pass. It wasn't shaped like a person or a creature. It was a blurry present, something that didn't hold a solid form, something that moved in a way the human mind couldn't track. They checked the time of the distortion. It matched perfectly with the moment. The lab had gone silent. For the first time, the envoys felt something they rarely felt: uncertainty. They had encountered strange things before, but this was different. This wasn't a disaster or a natural event or a malfunction. It was something else entirely, something that didn't belong to any known category. The lead envoy turned off the screen and said, "We need to leave. Don't touch anything else." The station crew stared at them, confused. Leave? What about the people who disappeared? The envoys didn't answer right away. Finally, one of them said, "We will report this. But you must shut down the station. No one should stay here." The crew felt a chill, but they followed instructions. The station was powered down room by room. People packed their essentials quickly, avoiding the silent lab and the corridor where the camera had frozen. The envoys gathered all the data logs, videos, readings, and locked them in secure capsules. They didn't speak much. They didn't give explanations. They simply focused on leaving as fast as they could. When their ship finally detached from the station and flew into open space, everyone on board felt a strange heaviness. They didn't talk. They didn't rest. They didn't even look out the windows. They had seen enough. Back on Earth, the envoys took the footage straight to their government. Everyone who watched it felt the same thing, the same quiet fear. Not panic, but a deep unease, the kind that stays inside your mind long after you close your eyes. The decision was made immediately. Cut off communication, block all diplomatic channels, and keep the footage hidden until they understood what it meant. No one wanted to involve the galaxy until they had answers. But answers didn't come. And soon, the Council would demand the truth. Back at the Galactic Council headquarters, The atmosphere had started to shift. What began as light jokes and careless laughter was slowly turning into confusion, then irritation, and finally concern. Earth had been silent for too long, and silence from humans was never a good sign. They were a species known for their constant communication, their debates, their messages, and their presence. But now, their seats stayed empty day after day. The delegates noticed. The presiding officer tried to maintain order, but every meeting felt incomplete. It was like a puzzle with one missing piece, small but important. Humans had always been part of discussions, especially those involving research, exploration, and security. Without them, parts of the agenda moved slowly. Some reports had to be delayed. Some topics had no one to answer the questions. Finally, after nearly 2 weeks of no response, the council demanded an emergency session. Every major species attended. The hall became full, humming with quiet tension. Even the delegates who had been joking earlier now sat straighter, trying to understand why Earth had suddenly disappeared from diplomatic communication. The presiding officer stood at the center podium and spoke in a calm but firm voice. Members of the council, we must address the continued silence from Earth. This is no longer a minor issue. It affects cooperation, shared missions, and upcoming projects. We need clarity. A murmur filled the hall. One delegate spoke first. Has anyone received any message from them? Even a simple update? The officer shook his head. None. All channels remain unresponsive. Another delegate frowned. Humans do not ignore the council. Something must have happened. A third delegate added, or they are hiding something. That comment caused a ripple of whispers across the room. Some believed it immediately. Others rejected the idea. A few leaned back in their chairs, thinking deeply. The council loved order, and anything outside that order made them uneasy. Suddenly, one of the quiet observers, the same group who had noticed the human envoy's unusual behavior earlier, stood up. His species had smooth gray skin and calm eyes that rarely showed emotion. He said, when the envoys left, their expressions were not normal. They were not angry. They were not offended. They were unsettled. Another observer spoke as well. Something happened on their last mission to a research station. Something they have not told us. This got everyone's attention. What mission? Someone asked. The observer replied, a small joint research station in the outer region. Humans were part of the team there. A few delegates exchanged uneasy glances. They remembered hearing small rumors, malfunction reports, power disruptions, but nothing serious. Now those tiny details suddenly felt important. The presiding officer tapped the podium. If Earth is withholding information, we must request the records of that station. But before he could continue, another delegate interrupted. And if they refuse to share? The officer hesitated. The council had power, yes, but Earth was not a small or weak member. Humans were known for their assertiveness, their independence, and their willingness to challenge anything they disagreed with. Demanding answers could easily turn into conflict. Still, the council needed the truth. We will send a formal request, the officer declared. Earth must respond. But Earth did not respond, not the next day. Not the next week. Not even after 3 reminders. The silence became too heavy to ignore. Meanwhile, on Earth, the envoys and scientists were trapped in long, exhausting meetings. They met in secure rooms, away from cameras, away from the public. The government demanded answers, but the envoys had none to give. All they had was the footage and fear. The footage was studied by every expert available. Physicists, analysts, biologists, engineers, no one could explain the distortion they saw inside the lab. The shape wasn't solid. The motion wasn't natural. And the interference pattern in the logs didn't match any known energy source. One scientist said, It behaves like a presence, but not physical. Another added, it interrupts systems without touching them. It moves without moving. Every explanation created more questions. Some suggested it was an unknown species. Some suggested it was a natural phenomenon. Some suggested it was something new entirely. But one thing everyone agreed on, it wasn't safe to share it. What if the council panics? One envoy asked, what if they blame us? Another added, what if we cause fear across the galaxy? A scientist whispered. So the humans stayed silent. Back at the council, the delegates were growing frustrated. The presiding officer finally stood before the assembly one morning and announced, this situation is unacceptable. Earth is part of the council. They must answer us. If they will not respond to messages, we must take further action. A nervous silence spread through the hall. What action? Someone asked. Before the officer could reply, one delegate suggested boldly, we send a team to Earth. Instantly, voices rose. That could be seen as aggression. They might consider it a violation of their privacy. We cannot simply fly into their territory. But a few delegates supported the idea. If something has happened, we must know. If they are in danger, we should help. What if there is a threat none of us know about? The discussion grew louder. Finally, the officer raised his voice. We will not send a team. Not yet. He paused, looking at the giant empty seat where humans usually sat. But we will call for a full diplomatic explanation. If Earth refuses, we must reconsider our rules regarding diplomatic silence. This was a strong statement. Very strong. The council almost never threatened its members. As soon as the session ended, the officer sent a priority message. Earth, present your explanation to the council immediately. Silence cannot continue. Hours passed. Nothing. A full day passed. Nothing. 3 days. Still nothing. Council members grew restless. Even the ones who mocked humans earlier had stopped laughing. Some even felt guilty. Meanwhile, the quiet observers noticed a pattern. The species that laughed the loudest before were now the most uncomfortable. They didn't want to admit they were wrong, but they could feel something was off, something big. During a private evening meeting, the presiding officer met secretly with a few senior members and observers. One of the seniors asked, what if Earth truly cannot respond? Another whispered, what if they are protecting us from something? The officer replied quietly, then we must demand to see the footage. This stunned the room. Footage? One observer asked. The officer nodded. There must be evidence. Something they witnessed. Something they fear. The senior members exchanged nervous looks. Asking for footage meant forcing humans to share something they clearly wanted to hide. It could damage their alliance. But the truth was needed. The next day, the officer prepared a final message. Earth, the council requires your presence at the next session. Bring all evidence related to the outer research station. This is not optional. This was the strongest message ever sent to humans in the eyes. Council's History. Earth stayed silent for nearly 12 hours. Then, finally, a message arrived. It was short, cold, unusual. We will attend. Do not discuss further details publicly. That was all. No greeting. No explanation. No description of what they planned to show. But the council felt a chill reading it. Something had happened. Something serious. Something. Humans didn't want the galaxy to know, but now had no choice but to reveal. The presiding officer sighed with relief and tension at the same time. Prepare the chamber, he instructed his assistants. Earth is coming. Word spread quickly. Delegates whispered. News channels guessed wildly. The quiet observers looked at each other, knowing the moment they had been waiting for was close. A message from Earth meant they were finally ready. Ready to explain. ready to show the footage, ready to reveal the truth that had silenced their entire planet. And when that footage played in the council hall, the same delegates who laughed at humans would regret every joke they made, because the truth was not something to laugh at. It was something that would shake the entire galaxy. The chamber lights slowly dimmed, and a soft glow filled the room as the screen at the center wall switched on. The delegates who had been laughing moments earlier were now settling into their seats, still wearing half smiles, as if expecting yet another reason to mock the humans. Most of them had no idea what they were about to watch. They thought it would be some dramatic warning, or a recording of a malfunctioning machine, something they could joke about later. But the human envoy stood quietly near the side of the room. His face looked tired, not angry, not defensive, just tired, like someone who had carried a burden too long. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The footage would speak for him. A soft hum came from the playback device, and the screen turned fully black. For a moment, nothing happened, and a few delegates snickered again, whispering that the humans probably brought a broken file. But then, the recording began. The first image was simple: a quiet hallway inside the remote research station. Smooth metallic walls, low emergency lights, a slight flicker from the overhead panels. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. It looked like any other scientific outpost in the far regions of the galaxy. Some delegates leaned back, unimpressed. The camera angles slowly moved as the recording continued. The hallway stretched forward, completely empty. No voices, no footsteps, no signs of the crew that was supposed to be working there. But still, the scene didn't look dangerous, just abandoned. The delegates whispered among themselves, wondering why the humans had guarded this footage so closely. They didn't see anything worth secrecy, and the sound changed. A faint static noise rippled through the speakers. Not loud, but enough to make a few people sit upright. The recording suddenly froze for half a second, then jumped forward, as if some frames had vanished. The hallway looked the same, but something about it felt slightly wrong. The lights seemed dimmer, the shadows longer. And then came the first sign that something was terribly off. Shape appeared at the far end of the corridor. It was faint, almost invisible, like a smudge of darkness. No clear outline, no face, no body, just something that wasn't supposed to be there, moving in a strange, uneven way, almost like it was sliding rather than walking. A sudden chill ran through the chamber. A few delegates leaned forward, eyes narrowing, as if trying to understand what they were seeing. The shape flickered, not like a person, stepping forward more, like a glitch in reality itself. One moment it was at the end of the hall. The next it was halfway toward the camera. No sound, no movement in between. It simply shifted between positions without following the laws of physics. The laughter in the room was gone now. Completely gone. The shape flickered again, and this time, for a fraction of a second, its form became slightly clearer. Not enough to recognize it. Not enough to describe it. Just enough to know it wasn't like any creature known in the galaxy. Its edges wavered, bending the air around it. The walls behind it seemed to ripple, like heat waves rising from fire. But there was no fire, no heat, no source. Delegates who had mocked humans earlier are now staring at the screen with hands gripping their seats. Their expressions changed from confusion to fear. The recording continued. As the camera watched. The shape moved again closer now. The lights flickered with each shift of its position. The metal around it creaked softly, though nothing was touching it. One delegate covered their mouth, realizing that the footage wasn't edited. There were no cuts, no special effects, just raw footage from the station. The shape paused. Then the camera feed distorted. The walls bent inward. The ceiling stretched. The entire hallway seemed to twist like soft clay. Then the shape vanished. Static filled the screen, again short bursts, like something pressing against the recording itself, trying to break it. The sound made a few people flinch. Then, suddenly, the camera switched to another angle. This time, it showed a small control room. The chairs were empty. Papers and tools lay scattered on the floor. A mug was lying on its side, as if someone had dropped it while running. There were no bodies, no signs of struggle. Yet everything looked wrong. Like the room had been abandoned in the middle of a panic. And then there it was again. The shape appeared in the corner of the room, not walking in, not climbing through a vent. It simply existed there, as if it had always been part of the room, but was only now becoming visible. The delegates watching the footage felt something deep inside, an instinctive fear, the kind you feel when you sense danger before understanding it. Their breathing grew shallow, their hands tense. The shape began to move not with steps, but with strange shifts of its position. The camera glitched each time it moved, unable to fully capture its presence. The edges of the object warped, like the recording itself was being bent around it. A cold whisper spread through the chamber as the realization sank in. This wasn't a creature. This wasn't a machine. This wasn't anything they had a name for. The shape drifted toward the center of the control room. The objects around it, chairs, cables, data pads, began to shake slightly, as if pushed by invisible pressure. But then something even more disturbing happened. The screen went silent. No static. No hum, just absolute silence. The shape turned slowly toward the camera. Delegates, who had been leaning forward, immediately leaned back, as if trying to get away from the screen. The shape didn't have a face, but somehow it looked directly into the lens. The air around it bent sharply, like gravity was twisting. Then the footage froze. A few delegates gasped. Others whispered prayers in their own languages. No one joked. No one laughed. After a few seconds, the footage resumed, just for one last unsettling moment. The final frame showed the control room empty again. The shape was gone, but the walls looked warped. The floor panels were cracked, as if something had pressed down with unbearable weight. The camera itself seemed tilted, like it had been pushed aside. The recording ended there. The screen went black. No. One breathed for several seconds. The silence in the chamber was heavier than anything the council had ever experienced. Delegates who had mocked humans earlier were now staring at the blank screen with pale faces. Their earlier confidence was gone. Their laughter had died long before the footage ended. Everyone looked around, unsure what to say. They had expected noise, drama, or some exaggerated human warning. Instead, they had witnessed something their minds weren't ready for. The human envoy finally stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply said, "This is why we left the station. And this is why we blocked the region." No one interrupted. Not a single delegate dared to question him. He continued, "We don't know what it is. We don't know how it moves. We don't know what happened to the crew. But we know one thing." He paused, letting his words settle in the silent room. "It saw the camera. And that means it can see us too." A cold shiver moved across the chamber. The envoy didn't wait for questions. He simply bowed his head slightly, turned around, and walked out of the room, leaving the council frozen in shock. The footage had done what months of arguments could not. It silenced the entire galaxy. The chamber remained silent long after the screen went black. It was the kind of silence that didn't just fill the room. It pressed down on everyone inside it. Delegates sat frozen, some leaning forward, some leaning back, but all wearing the same expression: shock, fear, confusion, and something deeper. Something they didn't want to admit. They were scared. Moments earlier, they had laughed at the humans. Now they could hardly breathe. The human envoy had already left the hall. His footsteps had faded down the corridor, but the weight of his presence still hung in the air. It felt as if everyone in the room had been slapped awake from a long, arrogant dream. Finally, one of the delegates broke the silence, not with a speech, but with a shaky breath. It was enough to spark a chain reaction. Others began to move, adjusting in their seats, wiping their hands on their clothes, clearing their throats. But nobody dared to speak yet. Each of them kept replaying the footage in their minds. The empty hallway, the shifting shape, the distorted walls, and that final moment when the unknown figure turned toward the camera. That moment stayed with them like a shadow. You can't escape. It wasn't just frightening. It was wrong in a way no one could describe. They had all seen dangerous things before, wild creatures, rogue machines, cosmic storms, but this was something else. Something that didn't fit into any category. Something that didn't follow the rules of reality. And that terrified them more than anything. After almost a full minute of uneasy silence, the council leader finally stood up. His hands trembled slightly, and his voice sounded softer than usual. We must talk about this," he said, but nobody replied. Some avoided looking at him. Others dropped their eyes to the table, pretending to study the patterns in the wood. A few stared blankly at the floor, lost in thought. The leader cleared his throat, trying again. This is no longer about politics, and it is no longer about egos. We have seen something that is beyond all of us. Still no response. He slowly sat back down, as if he himself didn't feel confident enough to remain standing. Across the room, one delegate finally whispered, "Is it still out there?" The question floated in the air like a cold breeze. Everyone felt it. No one wanted to answer. Somewhere near the back, another voice quietly responded, "If the humans found it once, it can be anywhere." A ripple of unease spread throughout the hall. For the first time, the Galactic Council understood something that humans had understood from the beginning. This was not just a scientific discovery, and it was not just a danger. It was a mystery, an unpredictable one, and mysteries were often the most dangerous things of all. One delegate nervously tapped the table. "We need to call the humans back," he said. "We need to work with them." Another nodded quickly. Yes, of course. They shouldn't have left. We need them." This was ironic. Hours earlier, these same individuals had mocked humans for being dramatic and overly cautious. They joked that humans were emotional, unpredictable, and inexperienced. But now, everyone wanted the humans back. A third delegate, one who had laughed the loudest earlier, now spoke with a shaking voice. "They warned us, and we didn't listen. If they say this thing is searching, then we must take it seriously." The leader slowly looked around the room. He saw fear in every face. But beneath the fear, he noticed something else too: regret. Regret for not listening. Regret for making jokes. Regret for assuming superiority. He cleared his throat again. "We will send a message to Earth's representatives. We will request cooperation immediately." Request? Someone repeated. "No, we should apologize." The leader hesitated. Galactic councils did not apologize. They issued statements. They made declarations. They controlled entire regions. Apologizing was something they rarely did. But after seeing the footage, even pride had its limits. "Yes," the leader finally said. "We will apologize." Someone else raised a hand, voice trembling. What if they don't respond? That question settled over them like a heavy blanket, because nobody knew. Earth had already withdrawn from diplomatic meetings. Their envoys had left the council hall, not angrily, but quietly, as if they had already accepted that the council wouldn't understand until it was too late. And now that understanding had arrived too late. The council leader finally stood again. This time his movements felt heavier. "Send the transmission immediately," he ordered. "Tell them we have seen the truth." But even as he spoke, many in the room wondered the same thing. Would humans still want to help? After hours of discussion, the meeting ended. Delegates left the hall in small groups, whispering quietly. Some walked with their heads low. Others moved quickly, as if trying to escape the memory of the footage. Outside, the corridors felt colder than usual. The lights seemed dimmer. Even the usual sounds, the low hum of machines, the faint, distant chatter felt muted. It was as if the entire building sensed the fear inside its walls. A small group of delegates walked together, their steps slow and unsure. One of them finally said, "You know, I used to think humans exaggerated everything. But now—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone knew what he meant. Meanwhile, in another corner of the council building, a team prepared the official message to Earth. They rewrote it again and again. Unsure how to phrase something so delicate, how do you admit that you were wrong? How do you admit that the species you mocked was right all along? How do you ask for help after laughing at the ones who tried to warn you? Hours passed, but Earth still didn't respond. Some delegates grew restless. Others panicked quietly. Every minute felt heavier than the last. Some even suggested sending ships to Earth, but the idea was immediately rejected. Nobody wanted to get near the unknown threat or appear aggressive toward humans at such a time. At last, deep into the night cycle of the station, a signal arrived. A message from Earth. It was short. Very short. Only one line. "We saw your message. We will talk soon." The council stared at the single sentence displayed on the screen. It wasn't warm. It wasn't angry. It wasn't emotional. It was calm, and that calmness was unsettling, because everyone knew what it meant. Humans were not rushing back. They were not desperate. They were not waiting for the council's approval. They were preparing for something, and the galaxy didn't know what that something was. The following day, the council gathered again, still shaken, but slightly hopeful now that Earth had replied. Delegates sat down quietly, their behavior completely different from the first day. No mocking, no jokes, no dismissive expressions. This time, they were ready to listen. The leader opened the meeting. "When the humans return, we must work with them. No debates, no pride. We will cooperate fully." Everyone nodded. But just then, one of the security officers rushed into the chamber with a pale expression. "Council leader," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "we've received a new update from the team studying the abandoned research station." Everyone froze. For a moment, the officer couldn't speak. His face looked troubled. "What is it?" the leader demanded. The officer swallowed. "The station. The entire structure. It has vanished." A wave of horror swept across the room. Vanished how? Someone whispered. The officer shook his head. There was no explosion, no debris, no distress signal. "It is simply gone." The chamber filled with frightened murmurs. First, the creature appeared. Then the crew disappeared. Now the entire station had vanished. The leader sank into his chair. He didn't have answers, and that terrified him more than anything. Across the galaxy, fear spread faster than any warning message. Rumors erupted on every planet. People whispered about the footage, about the unknown shape, about the missing station. Everyone wondered, was the creature moving? Was it traveling through space? Was it searching for new places? And most importantly, was Earth the only one who understood what was coming? By evening, the humans finally sent a longer message, a short invitation. "Meet us tomorrow. We will tell you everything we know. No threats, no anger, just a calm invitation." The council leader closed his eyes in relief, but also fear. Tomorrow, the galaxy would learn the truth, and nothing would ever be the same again.